Good morning.
Good morning.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Can't believe it's almost Christmas. All the feelings and emotions and everything that goes along with this season, this time, it's so enjoyable and exhausting, and I mean, it's just the entire gamut of emotions during Christmas. It's just a really special time of year. It's wonderful to see family and see friends. It's wonderful to see all the beauty and the majesty that it holds. It's also supposed to be a time of preparation, a time of a season of preparing our hearts, of preparing our lives to receive the King. Now, we have one more Sunday left today. One more day to prepare ourselves before Christmas Eve in just a couple of days. And if you're like me, you probably don't feel very prepared. And I'm not talking just about, do I have enough gifts bought or enough gifts wrapped or prepared in the natural sense. But there's the whole spiritual side of Christmas, this Advent, this season of preparation, the preparing our hearts. And I just want to encourage you today that it's not too late. It is not too late. We have today, we have tomorrow, we have Tuesday, before we celebrate Christmas, to find a moment to prepare our hearts. Bishop's word this morning was so appropriate as far as what have we done to include Jesus into our life, to prepare our hearts. John the Baptist told us a couple weeks ago that we are to make straight the crooked paths. Our lives go down a lot of crooked paths. Our hearts have a lot of hills and gaps in them. And we are to prepare that for the coming King. It's not too late. And this isn't a message of condemnation. This is a message of hope that there's always another day. There's always another opportunity. There's always another moment. Don't waste it. Use it. Follow Christ. Receive Him into your hearts. We will be singing a lot of Christmas carols on Christmas Eve. And the words of those are so deep and so powerful. And I just want to encourage you this morning, even if it's right now, let's focus on what God is saying to us. Let's focus on what we're supposed to be doing to prepare our hearts. And let's prepare our hearts. Because this morning I have a very unusual story to tell you. But it's one that I delight in telling. My work, well, it brings me into contact with many different kinds of people. In fact, I deal with all kinds of people, from the humblest country folk to the highest officials. But the event I most vividly recall happened at one of the year's peak seasons. Our country's leader had felt that additional taxes were needed for us to meet our budget. So he had urged all local citizens to have their names registered at the polls so they could be duly taxed. Of course, this meant many thousands had to make their way across the countryside to the city, which represents their political interests. I recall the weather. It was cool. Although the fresh smell of spring was still in the air and grass was even good enough for limited grazing on the nearby hillsides. And the days, rather pleasant, but I admit the nights were somewhat chilly. But one night in particular stands out in my memory. It seems that the crowds had been unusually large that day, and many had come seeking lodging for the night, and as they lived at such a great distance to return home for bedtime, so they needed to stay, and I had already turned away dozens that were seeking shelter elsewhere. Exhausted, I had dozed at the register's counter when I awakened and was awakened by a gentle tapping on the countertop. Coming to with a start, I made out a figure of a young couple standing in the lingering shadows of the lamplight. "May I help you?" I asked. As the young man stood by his pretty companion, he began to speak in a low, trembling voice. "Do you have any room?" "Room?" I blurted out suddenly. No, there's no room here. You should have come earlier, or at least sent some word ahead. You'll have to go elsewhere, just like everyone else. I plopped back down on my stool and was prepared to continue my nap when, much to my surprise, the young man spoke again. Sir, you've got to have a room. Angrily, I jumped up and shouted at him, I don't have anything. I've already told you I can't take care of you, so beat it. I've got to get some rest. Patiently, kindly he responded, but sir, please, my wife is expecting a baby right away. We've tried everywhere else, and all the rooms are full. Can't you give her some place, please? Looking closer, I did notice that the young man spoke the truth about his wife. And then I began to really feel sorry for them. And I thought for a moment and said, well, you do need a place to stay, and if you're not too choosy, I believe I can provide something for you if you'll come with me. So I led them down to a cobweb-covered cattle cave nearby. It wasn't the best of surroundings, I must confess, but it did offer some shelter from the cold and privacy. Though I considered it the meagerest of offerings, the man was overjoyed. Couldn't stop thanking me for his kindness. I told him we could settle up in the morning, and I went back to my stool and soon forgot all about them as I dozed off into dreamland. Lost in the midst of my dream castles and my peaceful slumber, I again was awakened. This time rudely by a rather loud rapping at the door. Jumping up and hastily pacing to the door, I was greeted by 3 sheep herders. They apologized profusely for stirring me from my sleep and made it clear that they weren't interested in a room, but instead they explained why they had come. With an air of excitement and a flair for the dramatic, they told me this fantastic story. Said, sir, you won't believe this, but we were watching over our flocks on the hillsides nearby when lo, an angel of the Lord appeared to us. And the glory of the Lord shone all around us, and we were really, really afraid. Then the angel said to us, he said, don't be afraid, for today I bring you good news of a great joy which will come to all the people. For today unto you is born in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. Now each of us looked at each other in amazement and wondered if the angel knew what he was talking about. When he continued, he said, now you listen to me, men, this will be a sign for you. Look, over yonder in the east, there will be a star that you'll follow. And above where that star, below where that star is shining, you'll find a baby, wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. And he had no more finished speaking those words, sir, when suddenly there was a multitude of other angels that joined him, and they were in the air praising God, and they were saying, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace and goodwill towards men. Hallelujah. Immediately we were overjoyed by the sight of the star. So we said to one another, well, let's go over to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us. So we came with haste, sir, following the star, and you know, light appears to fall right over your place, right here. So, sir, we were wondering if you could tell us anything about this Christ child. Well, of course, the story seemed fantastic to me. I couldn't recall anything about a baby being connected to my business. After all, I wasn't running a hospital, much less a maternity ward. But they insisted that I must know something. The star proved that I must know something. Since they seemed so intent on finding out more and wasn't going to let up for me to get back to sleep, I started thinking, and then I recalled the guests that I had let down to the stable for the night, and it dawned on me there was a couple in the cattle cave, and she was pregnant. Oh yes, I exclaimed, maybe I do know something about a baby. Come with me. So excitedly I led them down to this meager place, and lo and behold, we cried in unison, it's a baby crying. Rushing in, we found it just as the shepherds had said, a newborn baby, wrapped in swaddling clothes and laying right there in a manger. Then the shepherds, one by one, knelt down beside the manger in such a humble manner. I couldn't really explain to me what happened after that, but somehow I was touched and moved to kneel down with them. Not only had a baby been born in my place of business, but strangely, somehow I felt as if this baby had been born in my heart as well. Incidentally, I never did settle up with that couple for the night's lodging. I just felt that I had been more than repaid with the unsearchable richness of Christ. That's my story. How often it comes to mind. I almost had no room for the Christ. And as I've reflected on that moment across the years, it seems to me something of a parable of the human predicament. So often people exclude the Christ from the inn of their hearts. How about you? Have you made room for Christ? Oh, there's one other thing. I forgot to introduce myself. You probably guessed it by now. I'm the Bethlehem innkeeper, of course. No room at the inn. How often have we heard this worn-out cliche? Christmas pageants for centuries have repeated these famous words from this little-known innkeeper from Bethlehem. No room at the inn. Except the one time, the little guy named Wally got the role as the innkeeper. See, Wally was kind of big for his age. He was 7. Everyone wondered what role the teacher would give him for the annual Christmas play, especially considering the fact that he had some disabilities and that would hinder his ability to perform. Perhaps he could pull the curtains or hand out bulletins. But to everyone's surprise, the teacher gave Wally the role as the innkeeper. Well, the boy, of course, was delighted. And after all, he only had one line to learn, and he memorized it immediately. There is no room at the inn. He had it down in no time. Until the night of the performance, that is. See, all the parents took their places. Every seat in the auditorium was filled. The children entered singing, "Oh, come all you faithful," and the lights dimmed. A hush was moved over the audience. The curtain opened on scene 1. Mary and Joseph entered the scene and walked up to the inn. "Please, sir," Joseph says, "my wife is not well. Could we have a room for the night?" Wally was there, proud, ready for his line. He had rehearsed it all night. He knew what to say, and he began, "There is," and then he hesitated. He started over again, "There is," and his mind went blank. Everyone was embarrassed for him, and poor Wally just didn't know what to do. Joseph thought he'd start to improvise and began just walking towards the stable with his wife, saying, "We'll go over here." And suddenly, seeing them walking away, Wally in desperation called out and said, Look, there's plenty of room at my house. Just come home with me." Oh, but if that had only been the case that night, on that sacred night in Bethlehem. See, over the years, the characters of the Christmas story have become clearly defined for us. And the issues all seem clear-cut. Herod's a villain. The wise men are heroes. The shepherds were heroes. And the innkeeper, well, poor innkeeper, he kind of goes down as one of the heavies in the story, right? In our minds, we envision him kind of as a crotchety old man in a nightcap, his head sticking out the second-story window and tersely shouting, "There's no room at the inn. Take the stable and leave me alone." But perhaps the innkeeper's gotten some bad press. Preachers over the centuries have had a field day with this poor guy. But was it his fault that the inn was built with one room too few? Was it his fault that Caesar Augustus had issued a decree that the entire world should be taxed? Was it his fault that Mary and Joseph were so late in arriving? But you know something? This simple little statement about being no room in the inn becomes a symbol all throughout Luke's gospel. As he writes his gospel, it almost becomes a theme. Luke plays on this concept of no room for Jesus throughout his whole gospel. He takes the one line, "There's no room at the inn," and shows us how this phrase was recurrent through Jesus' whole life.
Amen.
Throughout his life, Jesus finds that there's very little room for him in a multitude of settings. What started at his birth continued to plague him throughout his entire life. See, the question that Luke leaves each one of us to wrestle with is this: will there ever be any room for him? Let's examine Jesus' life a bit and see the places that he didn't fit in during his time on earth. First, there was no room for Jesus in the economic world. Luke records that one day Jesus and his disciples stepped off a boat at Gadara And a madman, screaming wildly and tearing at himself, suddenly approached them. Jesus walked up to the man and asked him his name. Of course, we remember how he responded. "I am Legion," he said, "for we are many." He was right. The poor man was tormented, so confused, so pulled in so many different directions that there was no longer one personality, but many. So Jesus commands the demons to come out of the man, and they go into a nearby herd of swine. The pigs immediately stampede, run off the cliff. They all dive to their death and were killed. The man is healed. The Gadarene demoniac is healed. He's a normal person. They see him sitting there, clothed, not gashing at his arms, not cutting himself. And how did the community respond to this? Did they sing, "Praise God, from whom all blessings flow"? Did they cry out, "Praise be to Jesus"? Did they build a hospital in the community and name it after the Nazarene? No, none of these things. What they did was send a committee to Jesus and kindly ask him to get out of town. You see, they weren't concerned about the poor, possessed man. He'd been around so many years that he simply became part of the landscape. But really, what really got to them was the fact that Jesus had destroyed a herd of swine to heal him. And see, that was hitting them right where it hurt, in their wallets. It was quite clear to them that if Jesus wanted to stay around, their local economy would be disrupted. What they wanted was business as usual and not some itinerant miracle worker. So the local delegation asked Jesus kindly to leave. Exactly how they worded this to him, we don't know, but I'd like to venture a guess. I suspect the conversation went something like this: "Jesus, our lives were doing quite well before you came into town. We don't think that we need you, and we know that we don't want you. So Jesus, do us a favor and go try to save the world in some other place. We have worked too hard to fool around with some do-gooder like you." See, there was no room for Jesus in the economic world of his time. Secondly, there's no room for Jesus in the legal realm. The law was cut and dried. It had been codified centuries earlier, all the way back to Moses, and the law was clear. And I don't doubt that some of them said that tired old cliche, "They may not be good rules, but they're all we've got." One of those laws read, "Whoever commits adultery shall be stoned to death." It was there in black and white. It was even one of the 10 Commandments. "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Now, it just so happened it came down harder on the enforcement of this law, at least on women, than any other. But so be it, it was a law. The penalty of death was by stoning. There were no loopholes and no plea bargaining. Thus, when the crowd brought to Jesus a woman one day who had been clearly caught in the act, they were ill prepared for his response, because he refused to join their little lynch mob. Well, didn't he know the Torah? Oh, yes, he knew it. But see, Jesus also knew something about grace, too. And that was higher than the law, even the great law of Moses. The crowd was astonished that day, to say the least. But they dropped their stones, and they walked away. But you better believe they didn't like it one little bit. You see, a person who has had his mind changed against his will is a person whose mind isn't really changed. They may have walked away that day without the pound of flesh, but they wouldn't give up. They knew that they couldn't do anything about it right now, but if they would just wait, just bide their time, the opportunity would arise. On that day, in front of the angry mob, Jesus had set a precedent. What he said about the woman caught in adultery was this: people are more important than rules. They didn't buy that for a minute. To them, the law was the law, and it was clear that there was no place for Jesus in this whole matter. Thirdly, there was no room for Jesus in the realm of the religious order. Now, that may sound strange, but it's true. People like Annas and Caiaphas had already had all of the high positions that were available. Israel had all the high priests they needed, and then some. Who was this new man on the scene who called himself a teacher and a rabbi? Where did he go to seminary? Who were his parents? Where does he get the authority? Nowhere is there any hint the chief priests were accommodating to him. They didn't stretch out their arms and welcome Jesus into their clerical profession. In fact, they did the opposite. Everything they could do to keep him out. They weren't about to adjust their comfortable lives. in position in the community because of the claims of who Jesus was. But it went far deeper than that. They earnestly thought he was wrong, and it was their duty to expose him and oppose him. They organized themselves, and like politics, religion can create some strange bedfellows. And their plan climaxed when Jesus was hanging on a cross at Calvary. One thing was for sure, there was no room for Jesus in the world of the ecclesiastical as well. Fourth, there was no room for Jesus in the world of politics. Oh, the people wanted him to be king. Some of his disciples became so enthusiastic that they even asked him prematurely for positions of power when he came into authority. Jesus just wouldn't play by the rules. He told them that his kingdom was not of this world. And when he rode into Jerusalem and walked into the temple on Palm Sunday, he was prepared for a coronation ceremony. The people were. But Jesus disappointed them once again. He refused to play their game of politics. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. He shunned the smoke-filled rooms and spent his time with people who did not have their hands on the levers of power in society. Well, the people did come together and gave him a popular mandate. One thing that they all agreed on is that he should be crucified. So instead of an earthly crown, he exchanged it for a crown of thorns. So you see, there was no room for Jesus in the world of politics. Amen. Economic, legal, religious, and political realms. Wherever Jesus turned, there was no room for him. What began first in Bethlehem when the innkeeper turned him away became a reoccurring theme throughout his life. So let's look at us today. To you and to me, do we today have room for Christ in our lives? When the innkeeper was presented with this unexpected situation that night, he faced what I call our universal dilemma. At that point, he became every man. And every man is asked, do you have room for the Messiah? The fact is, the Messiah comes knocking at the door of our hearts many times in life, in various ways, through various people, in various events. Well, you might say, I'm not a preacher, and I'm certainly no theologian, so how am I supposed to recognize these times when Christ comes knocking at the door of my heart? But isn't that precisely the point? We are given no more preparation for revelation than the innkeeper had that night. He was just an ordinary guy like us. And he could have said, if only I had known this was the Messiah, I would have gladly opened my door. But if he had known that, he would have responded out of awe or fear or even courtesy and not out of conviction. So the Messiah comes to us just as he came to the Bethlehem innkeeper. Not in the form of a king with his entire splendor, but in the form of people in need, like Mary and Joseph. And whether or not we receive Christ in depends on how we respond to people in need, like Mary and Joseph. The innkeeper claimed he had no room. Isn't the crowded inn a rather appropriate symbol of our lives? It's so cluttered. And so often it's not with important things, but with things that don't amount to a hill of beans. Our lives are so cluttered, there's just no time, no energy, no money, no room left over. There's just no room in our lives for the Messiah. Inevitably, just as in Bethlehem, the Messiah comes to us when we so often least expect him. You'll notice that Mary and Joseph did not make their appearance at the beginning of the rush season, but late into the night, when the poor innkeeper was tired and irritable after a hard day's work. And then comes the knock on the door, the unexpected knock of destiny. So the Advent message for us is to watch and to wait. Keep our minds and our hearts open for his coming. You see, for the hour approaches when Messiah will come to you and to me. And like the Bethlehem innkeeper, we were forced to make a decision in that moment. Will our lives be so cluttered with incidentals that there will be no room for God? Or will we open the door and gladly welcome him in To the innkeeper, the knock that came that night was just another knock in a long series of bothersome interruptions. And that is how some respond to God in their life. Yes, fine. Take the stable. Fine, just leave me alone. Just let me be. Do anything. Just don't bother me. It's almost Christmas Eve. And God is knocking at the door of your heart. The question is there enough room in your life to let Him in? Christmas is the culmination of hope, love, peace, and joy. Christmas is the time to celebrate the gift of Jesus. And right now we have the opportunity to open our hearts and our lives to Him and to His love for eternity. I love the verse of the Christmas carol, Little Town of Bethlehem. And it's one of the deeper ones, so you may not know it. But listen to the words. It says, how silently, the wondrous gift is given. So God imparts to human hearts the blessings of His heaven. No ear may hear His coming, but in this world of sin, where meek souls will receive Him still, the dear Christ enters in. Amen. Merry Christmas, and may God bless you with His peace and love today and always. Amen.